Member for Cannington.
Thank you very much. I rise to speak on the budget debate, which of course is a general debate. Now, I do want to just turn straight away to this question of tabled papers number 943, number 2199 and number 3409.
What are you going to read out?
They are tabled papers by the Treasurer in his capacity as the Minister for Energy. And it might interest you, Mr Speaker, Acting Speaker, that those tabled papers that were tabled in September 2013, September 2014 and September 2015 were the annual reports of Western Power. Now, on page 57 of table paper number 943, which is the annual report of Western Power of 2013, it has financial statement, state of comprehensive income for the year ended 30th of June 2013. And about halfway down the list of income expenses, it says income tax equivalent expense. And it says $78.103 million. And actually, it also has the figure for the previous year, of course. It has $68.235 million. And then in the financial statement that the Treasurer, as in his capacity as Minister for Energy, tabled on in September 2014, table paper number 2199, on page 68, the same table, it has income tax equivalent expenses, and it says $87.841 million. And then what it says here in table paper 3409 is income tax expenses of $147.406. Now, it's interesting. They says that the Treasurer interjects in his usual unreasonable manner across the chamber. He says they weren't paid to the state government. Well, it's interesting that I don't have the previous year's budgets, but I do have the one that the Treasurer tabled for this year. Happened to have it lying around, given that the Treasurer gave us all a copy last Thursday. And at page 205, it shows the tax equivalent income from the public trading corporations, and for the budget year 16-17, it's $499 million. Now, $4 million. So let's get this lie out of the way. It is a lie for any member of the government to say that tax equivalent payments from government entities does not go to the state government. And the Treasurer knows that they go there. And I'm very appreciative of the Treasurer for the table that he's included in the budget papers to explain the relationship between the government and the trading enterprises. On page 229 is a very simple little chart that explains the difference between the total public sector and the public non-financial corporations and the public financial corporations and the consolidated account. Now, this is somewhat complicated. I recently was discussing with somebody who I thought would have understood these things quite clearly, but they didn't. The consolidated account is where the taxpayers pay. That's the bit of the state that relates to the taxes. So when the Liberal Party members of this Parliament voted in favour of increasing land tax on their constituents for 3 years in a row, that tax, those taxes that they voted to increase, they go into the consolidated account. But let's understand, as this little table this little chart on page 229 of the budget papers explains, the non-financial corporations, which includes Western Power, they are over on this little square. They're separate to the consolidated account. The money that Western Power raises from its customers is not tax revenue, and is not counted as tax revenue and does not appear anywhere in the budget. What does appear in the budget, the bit that we as parliamentarians approve, is the bit that comes from in tax equivalents, local government rates equivalents, dividends and loan guarantees, which, by the way, there's over $50 million is paid to the government by Western Power because of the $7.2 billion of debt that Western Power has on the books, because the government takes 0.7% of the total borrowings of Western Power as a fee, and that's over $50 million. So that's on top of all those other payments that are described. So those payments, it's only those payments that come into the consolidated account and are included in the budget. So let's understand what happens. If you sell a government trading enterprise, that revenue, not the whole revenue of the entity, because that never gets included in the budget, but those payments that are made from that entity to the consolidated account disappear, and they are not therefore available for use on hospitals and schools and roads. Now, when I made that point earlier today during the MPI, the Minister for Health interjected and said, "Oh yes, but nor is the debt servicing costs." But that's not correct, because the debts are not serviced by the taxes that you all voted to increase. They are paid for by the revenues of Western Power, and Western Power gets its revenues from its customers. Now, as we all know, most people in the state have a Western Power connection, and even though we're not actually customers of Western Power because we pay Synergy, and Synergy is then the customer of Western Power, and so of course we're impacted. But that's a service fee, and that service fee has nothing to do with the ownership of Western Power. It's actually a regulated issue, as the Premier explained during the MPI debate. And that income will not go down if it's privatised. It will not go down if it is privatised, because it's called a revenue cap. Western Power charges up to its revenue cap. That's what it does. And what we will lose if we privatise Western Power is the dividends, the tax equivalents, the rates equivalents, and the dividends. The tax subsidy, I'll get to that in a moment. I'm making a special comment about the tax subsidy. And that 0.7%. So let's understand that the $7.2 billion of debt held by Western Power is included in the net debt figure of the state because it's part of the total amount of debt that's guaranteed by the taxpayer. So in other words, if Western Power tomorrow was to go broke, then we would have to pick that debt up. There's no question about that. That's why, but that's how come the government gets the 0.7%, because that's the calculated cost of that guarantee, around $50 million a year. Of course, if you sell Western Power, you'll retire that debt, but you lose the assets. You lose the assets, so that doesn't help you. And in fact, as UBS points out in their paper in respect of the New South Wales assets, the benefit from because you pay off that debt, but that debt was never paid for by the taxpayers, it's paid for by electricity consumers. Of course, you've freed up the capital that's in that, like Western Power. But if you then spend that capital on new earning assets like schools or hospitals, then the cost of servicing that activity is actually going to add to your costs, and you need a revenue to service that. So this idea of selling assets to then recycle them into something else only works if the new asset you buy has an income stream that services the debt. And that's the point UBS makes in their paper. UBS is no friend of the Labor Party. I recently met with UBS executives who pitched to me the sale of Western Power. They went through their argument about why Western Power should be sold, and I respect the fact that UBS has that position. Just the same as the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which obviously has an ideological position saying that it should be done by the private sector. I accept those arguments, but those arguments are not justification for what will mean the state of Western Australia ends up needing more taxes. So if you win the next election and sell Western Power, the next thing that you'll do is you'll come back here to replace the $500 million a year that Western Power is currently paying to the taxpayer. And as the Leader of the Opposition points out, there's also this question which is highlighted in the Orion paper that was put together on behalf of the ETU. There's also the TEC, the Tariff Equalisation Contribution. And the Leader of the National Party's here, and I'm very pleased for that because he should understand exactly what's happening here. There's in round figures, $130 million comes from Western Power to Horizon Power to subsidise an issue that we all agree on, which is the uniform tariff. Back in the 1990s, the Premier, when he was Energy Minister, tried to get rid of the Tariff Equalisation arrangements, the uniform tariff scheme. In fact, he actually introduced the abolition of it for small business, and it was only the reaction by the then Labor opposition that the Liberal National Party government reversed course on that decision to eliminate the uniform tariff.
The National Party leaked the cabinet submission.
Oh, there you go.
By Cognate at the time.
Yeah.
I remember it.
Yeah. So let's understand, $130 million is paid by Western Power to Horizon to subsidise the much, much higher cost of operating off the grid in those remote locations. Now, in New South Wales, as I'm sure, Acting Speaker, you're aware, the New South Wales government is not selling the poles and wires business in the regional part of New South Wales because, of course, it's not a profitable business, and who would ever buy a business that doesn't make money? They're continuing to retain that in government hands because the taxpayers are subsidising that regional scheme. It's not being paid for out of the revenues of the other distribution businesses in that state. But in Western Australia, the $130 million, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea is a separate issue, but it comes out of the revenue of Western Power. Now, no one in their right mind thinks that a private sector purchaser of Western Power is going to continue to pay that $130 million, or they're going to demand a lower price for that entity or higher revenue. The government is moving our regulation for Western Power, or they're proposing to, because they haven't actually introduced the legislation, but they're proposing to move the regulation from the Western Australian Economic Regulation Authority to the Australian Energy Regulator. The new owners are going to, I can guarantee this 100%, because it's in their interest to do so, to ask that if they continue to pay the TEC, and I doubt they will, be included in their revenue cap. So it's exactly the same thing. If you sell that entity, it will be paid, the tariff equalisation contribution will be paid either by taxpayers, or it'll be a lower price for Western Power, or it'll be higher charges on the community in the south of the state. There's another issue on that, and that is that built into Western Power is a subsidy from metropolitan and southwest communities to the wheatbelt communities. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with that. That's entirely appropriate. It's exactly what the Labor Party wanted when we disaggregated Western Power in 2006. It is the right thing to do. But who thinks that a private owner is going to put the interests of consumers in the wheat belt ahead of profit? It would be against their company incorporation if they did that. And the idea that you can have some form of regulation to ensure it is ridiculous. And in Victoria, we know that that's exactly what happened. And the Royal Commission into the Black Saturday bushfires pointed out that there had been underinvestment in maintenance of the rural poles and wires business. Now, I'm quoting from a presentation, Use Your Power, which is obviously the ETU and the ASU here in Western Australia, in their campaign to protect consumers, electricity consumers in Western Australia from the privatisation of Western Power. They point out that the Royal Commission, I'll just read a quote from a quote, 5 of the 11 major fires that began that day were caused by failed electricity assets. Among the fires was that at Kilmore East, and as a result of which 119 people died. That's a direct quote from the Commission. The paper then goes on to say further that the assets in question were not constructed to the industry guidelines at the time, and the risk of falling electricity assets was foreseeable and should have been prevented by following proper procedures. That's a summary of the Royal Commission's decision. And again, a summary, it says, telling the inquiry such proposals, that is, the then government of Victoria and the electricity asset owners said that against a recommendation that there be an upgrade to the facilities, because they told and then I'm quoting the document, the inquiry such proposals would cost billions of dollars and likely increase power bills by 20% every year for 20 years. Now, all the claims of lower costs for the privatised network in Victoria ignore how those lower costs were derived. They were derived by underinvestment in the fixed assets of that network. And when the network went bad and killed 119 people, of course, people sued the owners of the asset. And there was a class action on behalf of the Kilmore East Kinglake bushfire victims, and that was settled for $494 million. And there was a further settlement for other victims of another fire for $300 million. And guess what? The Australian Energy Regulator, which the Treasurer is asking us to approve, or will be asking us to approve as the new regulator for Western Power, allowed the fixed asset investors to pass on that $794 million of settlements to the customers. So the customers of Victorian power poles, power distribution customers, were the ones who paid for the settlement, for the deaths of those people in those fires. Now that's the practices that the Treasurer says we should all support in this state. No wonder, if I could have an extension please.
Extension granted.
No wonder the Cabinet won't agree to this wrong-headed proposal. Wrong-headed proposal. This is the most bizarre situation in the world. We know the Liberal Party, if they win the election, you know, I'll trust the National Party as much as I can throw them, which is none at all because I'm a weakling. They'll fall over. So if the Liberal Party, if the Liberal Party form government, their lapdogs in the National Party will support the privatisation of Western Power. And I tell you what, that I notice, Mr Acting Speaker, and I'm going to ask a question. I'm happy to take an interjection. To the Leader of the National Party, are there any circumstances in which you would form government with the Labor Party after the next election?
Oh, look, the National Party are an independent country
So
party.
what are the conditions?
We're asking people to
You
vote
tell
for
me.
us. We're asking
Are
people,
there any
we're
conditions
asking
in which
people
you
to
would
vote for us
So-
on our merits.
Okay.
You just
I want to know. It's pretty simple. Either you're a lapdog of the Liberal Party, or you're prepared to back Mark McGowan as Premier. Are you prepared to back Mark McGowan as Premier?
The National Party are an independent country party.
Are you prepared? You see, this is the problem.
Merits.
These people will only support the Liberal Party. They are the lapdogs, the country lapdogs. That's right. These people, the National Party, will only ever back in the Liberal Party. And the Liberal Party are going to the next election saying, vote for us, you get privatisation. In fact, the Premier said today that if he wins the election, he expects the Labor Party to vote in favour of privatisation. So the idea that the National Party is going to somehow provide protection to bush communities is a fallacy.
For Cannington, you know what they'll do after the election? They'll do a deal on Western Power in order to get another national
Into cabinet.
Cabinet.
Yeah, that's
what
right.
they'll do.
Another big white car. That's the price. One big white car and you get... No, that's right. So the only way...
Now, members, let's settle
the
down.
only way to prevent the sale of Western Power is a vote for Labor. The only way you can protect Western Power is to vote for Labor. That's the only way you can support protecting the community in this state.
Members.
And maintaining public ownership of Western Power is to vote Labor, because the National Party won't do it. You want to support the bush, you want to have a uniform tariff policy, you can only do that with the Labor Party. That's what's being said tonight by the National Party, because they'll only back the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party are going to sell Western Power. There's only one way, and even though the budget paper points out that even the Liberal government of this state cannot say whether it's a good... they can't say a single benefit for selling Western Power. That's what they say. They say that a decision to sell the asset only be made following confirmation that the divestment is in the best interests of both taxpayers and electricity consumers. They have no evidence to say that it's a good idea, but that's their election commitment. And I heard the Treasurer in the MPI today saying that after the election he'll do an inquiry. So let's make this clear. They are promising to sell Western Power even though they have no evidence to say that it'll be a good idea. And then they'll hold an inquiry, and the National Party are going to go around the bush. So don't worry, Don't worry, because we'll stand up to them. But the problem is the National Party are sidelined. They're irrelevant. They will never form government with us. They will never form government with us, so they're only supporting the... That's right. The National Party are completely and utterly irrelevant outside Westminster, outside Perth. They are absolutely irrelevant. They are just a splinter group on the barnacle.
Leader of the National Party, just settle down and relax a little bit, and everyone just give the member for Cannington a fair go. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Speaker. I'm very appreciative of your protection. So let's make it clear. They're a barnacle on the Liberal Party, and that's it.
Members.
Now I want to turn to Horizon Power. Now there's this proposal around that's come out of work done by the chairman of Synergy to sell the high voltage transmission system of Horizon. And we heard in the chamber, the MPI debate this earlier today, that the Treasurer said, oh, well, this would be able to connect in Pacific Pacific. Now, that's an interesting issue, because I remember in 2008 when the Liberal Party cancelled this project, because it was, after all, the #1 priority of the former Labor government, submitted to Infrastructure Australia, and we were negotiating on how to fund it. And the first decision, actually, this is not a joke, the first decision of the incoming government was to cancel the project. And I remember the Honourable Annalena McTiernan asking the Premier a question about it here in one of my first question times as a member of the chamber. And what did he say? Oh, have you talked to Rio and BHP and FMG and CITIC? Do you even know if they want to use it? Well, what's the answer? There's a report done by the chairman of Synergy. Now, I don't understand how the chairman of Synergy, who's got a full-time job administering Synergy, how he had the spare time to do a report into Horizon. Perhaps he doesn't need to be paid a full $500,000 a year as chairman of Synergy. Maybe that's the case. Maybe he does have enough spare time to do this work. But he's done a report into this issue. But isn't it interesting, Acting Speaker? That report's never been made public. Paid for by the taxpayers, never made public. Now, the Treasurer announces the sale of Horizon on the same basis that, we think it's such a great idea we don't know anything about it, which is what he says in the budget speech. But we don't know any of the justification that the electricity consumers in the southwest of this state, me and you, Mr Acting Speaker, have paid for, wasn't paid for by the taxpayers of the state, it was paid by the Synergy consumers, because it was done by the full-time chairman of Synergy. And we don't know what's in that paper. But I tell you what, the one thing I can guarantee is the one profitable bit of that Horizon business is the high voltage transmission system. You cannot make money, everybody knows this is not in dispute, you can't make money selling electricity in Wyndham or Kununurra or to an Indigenous community. You can't do it, it's too hard. In fact, you can have a look on the website of Synergy at their REBS rate, because their REBS rate reflects the underlying electricity value in that community. It can be up to 45 cents. Now let's get a picture on that. It's less than 8 cents in the metropolitan area. So it's 5 times more expensive just to do the electricity bit. Don't worry about the poles and wires. The energy component is 5 times more expensive in some of these communities than it is in Perth. So you can't make money selling the electricity at 26 cents all in, including the cost of transportation, when it's costing you 40 and 45 cents to produce the electricity before you transport it to your home. So it is not a profitable business, Horizon, and it never will be, and it can't be. And we all understand that. That's why there's a subsidy. But the reason the subsidy is not as big as it could be is because Horizon has one profitable unit, which is the high voltage transmission business. And that is the bit that the Liberal Party and the National Party are planning to sell. That will mean higher electricity costs for the people in Karratha, Port Hedland and every country town. And in fact, higher costs for here because we have an equalisation scheme. And so if the cost of electricity goes up, people in the southwest of the state have to pay the cost. because of the tariff equalisation contribution scheme, unless you get rid of that. But that, we would never, the Labor Party isn't going to do that, because unlike the Premier, we agree with the uniform tariff scheme. So the idea that there's no cost, that's going to be a benefit to sell the high voltage transmission system is simply not true. There are great issues involved for the communities that are serviced by Horizon, and we're not going to cop that sort of nonsense. Also make a point. When an electricity asset is owned by the government and the wires the wires that are connected to your house are owned by the government, and something goes wrong, you can go and see your local Member of Parliament. I'm sure, Mr Acting Speaker, that people come to see you complaining about issues relating to Western Power. Compare that, and then you can ring up Western Power. They've got a parliamentary liaison officer. You can deal with it. You get things fixed. And if things don't get fixed, you write to the Minister. The Minister replies to you. Tell me about the infrastructure for Telstra. There's Crawford Street in East Cannington. Had a line. Despite being a relatively inner city suburb, I have Queen's Park, East Cannington, Beckenham, very intense new housing estates there. I had in Crawford Street, every time it rained, the internet connections of all the communities up and down Crawford Street would go out. Now, the linesman that would come to fix the problem told the residents that the problem is that we don't have enough time. We're told just go out and poke around, but the problem is that there must be a break in the conduit or something, and sand gets inside whenever it rains. But they don't have time to fix it, so they just come out, and of course when it stops raining and dries out, the problem disappears. That's the service that you're provided for by private infrastructure providers. And don't get me started on the airport. The two big Commonwealth privatisations were the airports and Telstra, and nobody's satisfied with their service. And that's the plan that people are arguing that we should support the sale of Western Power. And then there's all this question about future technologies. The idea, because let's understand, the future technologies, whether it's owned by the government or owned by the private sector, will be paid for by the same people. Not the investors, they will be paid for by the customers. All infrastructure owned by Western Power has been paid 100% by the customers of Western Power ever since corporatisation, because there is no tax subsidy
Member,
in the scheme.
given the time, I vacate the chair until the ringing of the bells.